called Dunwoody City Council meeting September 13th at 6 o'clock to order, unless I see objection. Seeing none, this meeting is called to order. I thought we could start by having a moment of silence to remember those that were lost and honor those that were heroes on September 11th. Okay, Joe, Councilman Seconder, can you please lead us in the invocation and the pledge?
Sure. At this meeting, help us to make decisions which keep us faithful to our mission and reflect our values. Give us strength to hold to our purpose, wisdom to guide us, and a keen perception to lead us. And above all, keep us charitable as we deliberate. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You ready? Okay. I believe we have a motion to change the agenda.
Yes. I would move to change the agenda to pull item number 11 and number 12 up to be items number 3 and 4.
Okay, so can we do that under public hearings? That's my only question. Or do we have to? Waiting. No, I think before.
Have it be our first item.
Okay.
And add business items as numbers 3 and 4, and then continue with the rest of the business items after the completion of the public hearings.
Okay, so I move to bifurcate the business items and have items 11 and 12 be in front of the public hearing as business item number 3 and 4.
Second.
Is that okay, Bill, the way we did it? Any discussion? Seeing none, I call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion passes. We have public comments. Sharon, do you have any cards? No cards, no public comments. We'll have another section of public comments at the end of the meeting. Thank you. Mr. Linton.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. All right. I'm going to have my city manager's report, which is for the report ending on September 10th, 2021. Public Works, the Peeler Road sidewalk substantially complete. And so that project keeps going on, as well as the Spalding and Shamley Dunwoody intersection. That project, we're working on a stormwater pipe. It still has some conflicts with some underground utilities, but work is returning to that area. The 2021 paving is now complete in all the neighborhoods. We're doing some final finish work in that area. Georgetown Gateway, the contract completed approximately 240 feet of new water main, and Atlanta Gas Light has also installed about 1,100 feet of new gas main. As y'all know, that project has a lot of utility relocation in that area, but it's going to be a great project once it's completed. Other highlights are the Briars North stormwater repair, also the North Shallowford Road path. We submitted an application with the Atlanta Regional Commission for federal funding to complete the design there, and also the Vermac Road path. Womack to Vanderland, the department's gathering public input on that in August. So that is, those are some of the projects in Public Works. In our police department, I want to go and talk for a moment about the vulnerable road user ordinances. And in your report, it lists some detail areas that we were in last month, and also that ordinance is moving very well through the process in terms of people that are violating that. The other thing I want to point out outside of all the workload and activities, once again, is the LPR, the license plate reader cameras, and how much assistance those give our officers. And so I appreciate once again the council's and the city's investment in that project. not to go into too much details, but I will point out that as you look through the park and recreation area, you know, we have our new fall winter edition of the Leaf, which is our program manuals come out. We have that's out now, and that was issued on September the 2nd. And then also under community development, been a very active area there as well, with 592 building inspections completed over the last period. And I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not gonna go into all the different details. I'm glad to answer any questions on that area. Valerie Hicks is our new code enforcement officer, has been hired for that department. Economic development, here again, working a lot with the, on short-term recommendations for recovery for Dunwoody's key economic sectors for COVID-19. We also have economic development's taking the lead on a $150,000 community development assistant grant through the Atlanta Regional Commission. So that area is also very productive right now. IT, we're still working on our migration to the cloud, as most of y'all have experienced going into the different email system on the cloud now. That's been something that's been a goal of ours for quite a while. It's in the final stages at this point. Communications and marketing, there's a few links in there, but when you hit the hotspots or the hot links in there, you'll see different portions of how Jennifer and her department have come up with reports in those areas. The department is also designing the winter 2021 edition of the Dunwoody Digest. That's something, as y'all know, is back in print again, as well as electronically distributed. So just at your leisure, go through those links. The other the three departments, which would be the municipal court, has disposed of 469 cases and reset 56 cases. Once again, I can't say enough good things about municipal court and then and the job that they've done in getting the cases pushed through much more further advanced in a lot of the cities during the COVID problem that we've had. We've also have our deputy clerk went over to the city of Doraville, and I'm proud of her because she's going to be the #1 clerk in that city. So it was a good opportunity for her. But we do have the position of deputy clerk now open, and we're doing the final interviews in that area now. So that's what I have in those departments. Glad to answer any questions. Hate to rush through it, but I know there's a lot of information there.
Does anyone have, oh, John.
Thank you, Eric, for a great report. It's always a highlight. It's got a lot of information. In fact, I publish it and make sure that it's read by a wide variety of citizens in the community. We got some feedback on it, and I just wanted to share it with you. I sent the email to you, but basically they were looking to see if there's any way in which we can include metrics on See-Click Fix. See-Click Fix is basically the citizens making requests for improvements to the city and things that need to be fixed. And this citizen was just wondering if there's any way that we can put some metrics in there on how we are doing on our iWork system, just to make sure there's some accountability on See-Click Fix. So just a suggestion from the citizen I wanted to pass along to you and Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe.
Yeah, it's just a comment first. It's great to see all the information here, the citizens. It's all really available, and appreciate the format of the report. Just on the blocking and tackling of the outcome, the upcoming activities. Some departments show upcoming, some don't. If we could just kind of, anything that has a significant citizen impact, whether it's an outreach event, the Georgetown shows what's happening, that's really great. I also just, from the Georgetown, I think it's great to stay in front of that. I like the signage, thank you, because I was out there in front of, is it the Shell right there in 285? I was there on the other day, and here was the owners looking at that. You know, some of these folks don't even know what's going on. They just see stuff going on. So here was the owners of the Shell gas station looking at the sign. What's going on here? So I gave them my card and I said, here's, you can scan, get information. So I really appreciate having those signs and so on. Just like to, just one more notch though, just to kind of show upcoming, that's significant to the community up there. But excellent putting together there. And then the police, I appreciate doing the speed safety. And I hope that continues through the year. I know we can only do so much enforcement. We have to follow the laws. And of course, eventually we're going to re-engineer and make things calmer and safer for traffic, pedestrians, and street calming and so on. But I appreciate having the traffic detail there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody down here? Nobody? Good report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so Sharon, when you're ready, you have to skip down and then.
So Mayor, this is number 11 that has been moved to item number 3. And ordinance to amend the city of Dunwoody zoning classification and map of lot parcel number 18-366-01001 and 18-366-01022 in consideration of zoning case RZ 2101 for 5500 Chamblee Dunwoody Road and 1244 Dunwoody Village Parkway. Paul Leonhardt.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I have a brief presentation prepared regarding a request from Councilman Seconder for visualization for height. Would you like that presentation right now, or is that something that we'll push to a future meeting?
If you wouldn't mind doing it, especially that one document that I know you added since last time.
Yep, okay. And the request was like to put a little bit of a visualization together to see how the additional building height, because if you remember, like we added by using a different zoning district, the maximum height went from 65 to 80 feet. And the question was, what impact would that have? So what impact would the additional height have? So we had one of our planners work on that and do sort of a bit of an abstract visualization of this. So we didn't go out and measure anything because we didn't want to go on private property. We didn't go out we didn't do any surveying. So this is a basic assumptions, house height up to 35 feet. Most houses are in practice shorter than that, of course. And people generally aren't on top of their roofs. The maximum commercial building height of 80 feet. So we used the maximum height to see if this would be topped out at 80 feet. How would that look? And then for the tree canopy, we used the height of 60 feet. Which is relatively conservative. So mature canopy often reaches like 80 to 100 feet. And those are fairly mature trees behind the shopping center over there. And then finally, we used our existing topography information in our GIS system. So we generally have that in pretty good quality, but of course, kind of on the ground, things come out slightly different. So with those little caveats, we did 3 sections so we used like a northern, a central one, and the southern section where we went from the residential lots through that existing buffer. And we used that future cross section should zoning like this be approved. And then the potential future development on that site. And we used these 3 locations. And the first one, I'll explain a little bit what you're seeing here, and then I'll go through the remaining ones relatively quickly. So this is the first cross section, the northernmost one. This is to scale. So both the horizontal and the vertical here are drawn to scale. So you can see here that we're increasing on the left-hand side here. You see the residential property, we're at an elevation of 1072, so slightly over 1,000 feet above sea level. Over there, where the future building location would be, we're going up to 1094, so we're increasing about 20 feet, so it's sloping upwards to the commercial property. So it shows on the left-hand side, the house height of approximately 35 feet, then the buffer in sort of that's shown at 35 feet depth, as it is sort of currently proposed, with trees of 60 feet height. Then it shows the 115 feet of open space. Then it shows the 62 feet of right-of-way for the future street in the district. And then on the very right-hand side, it shows commercial building at 80 feet tall. And then it shows sort of that diagonal line up there is sort of more or less a sight line. And it goes from the roof of the commercial building towards the canopy, to where it hits the canopy. And then on the left-hand side, it shows you approximately where you would need to stand to be able to see the building. So in this case, that would be approximately 50 feet. So at cross-section A, people at those houses, whether they stand on the ground floor whether they stand on a deck at the second floor or whether they would be on the roof. The additional height really doesn't make a difference here. I'll quickly show a second one here. And the difference between these three cross-sections is only the grade. So like the buildings are the same, the height of the trees is the same. The only difference really is the grade change. Here we have a situation where it slopes up behind the residential property. So we're going from 1102 up 18 feet. And then it goes slightly down towards the commercial property, which makes it even less visible than the other example, because the buffer is at an elevated position compared to the previous one. And then elevation C, so the very southern cross section. And here we have a situation where the buffer is slightly below. So it's at 1115, so 7 feet below the residential property and 5 feet below the commercial. What that does is it limits a little bit the height buffering effect of those trees. And so here it is, if a person would be at the 35-foot level, so if they would be on the roof of the house, here they could look over the tree canopy in this example and see the top of the building. With this, I would conclude like the brief presentation of this. And if there are any questions about sort of this visualization, please do ask. Likewise, like we've heard a fair amount kind of about sort of active negotiations. So should this be deferred again, so we would be happy to work on potential zoning conditions and so forth.
Does anybody have any questions? No.
No. So just Councilman Lambert and Councilman Bastian and I met with the neighbors last week for about 2 hours. And we got some really good points. I think Cecil and Bill submitted it to the commercial property owner's attorney, and we feel strongly that in 2 weeks, we can finally put our new village plan to rest.
Okay. You only need 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
Okay, so go ahead and make a motion.
I make a motion to defer to the September 27th city council meeting.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Harris, second by Councilman Reichteicher, which I don't have to say that anymore because Sharon's sitting here. Any discussion or questions? Go ahead, John.
Was that motion also for item 12 or is that only for 11?
I think we have to do them differently.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah,
I'm
no, I think we have
understanding.
to, yeah. All right, so any other questions? Seeing none, I call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion to defer passes unanimously. And whenever you're ready, Sharon, you can read the next one. Take your time.
This is previously item 12, which has now been moved to item number 4. An ordinance amending chapter 27 of the City of Dunwoody Code of Ordinance by amending section 27107B to amend the Dunwoody Village Regulation Map, and by amending section 2797 to delete the regulations for the Dunwoody Village Overlay District.
Anybody have there's questions for our staff? Okay.
All right, move to defer to September 27th city council meeting.
Second.
Moved by Stacy, second. I gotta stop doing that, Joe. Any questions, further discussion? Seeing none, I call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion to defer for 2 weeks passes unanimously.
Mayor will now move to the public hearing items. The first item is an ordinance to amend Chapter 16 Land Development Regulations of the City of Dunwoody Code of Ordinances to include language for expired permits and to amend the language for appeals. And this is Madeline Smith presenting.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to pull up my presentation real quick.
You might need to pull that microphone down too a little bit too.
Is that better?
Yes.
So over the past couple of months, the Community Development Department has compiled a list of text amendments to our city code. We are mainly looking to clean up the existing code rather than make any extensive changes. Our general goals are to correct inconsistencies, clarify vague language, and improve processes. We feel that these amendments will be both to the benefit of city staff and the community. This is a list of the text amendments. There are 14 in total. On paper, on screen, this looks very daunting, but I promise most of them are pretty easy. We have text amendments to 4 different chapters, Chapter 8, Chapter 16, Chapter 26, and 27. We have 4 different agenda items for each chapter. I've split up my presentations by chapter and we'll be giving a separate presentation on each. At the end of each presentation, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Again, it's a lot of text amendments. It will be quite a lot of information. So if you need more time to think about these and come up with any questions later, you can feel free to email me. Another thing, if you guys would like to make changes to the content or if you see any issues, please let us know. But if you could get it to us by the end of the week so that we have time to prepare it for the next Mayor and City Council meeting, that would be greatly appreciated. So with that, I'll start with our first chapter, which is Chapter 16. We have 7 total proposed amendments to this chapter. The first has to do with time limitations for reinstating expired permits. So issued permits expire 180 days after issuance or 180 days after the most recent inspection. We're proposing this amendment to establish a process, a formal process for reinstating permits. We already do this informally, but the amendment formalizes the process and it's explicit in its need for a re-review according to current regulations and also sets a standard for fees as well. The next set of amendments, the rest of the amendments for Chapter 16, are going to be related to the appeals process. This is a process that allows aggrieved parties or parties aggrieved by an administrative decision. So for example, the approval of a subdivision or the approval of a land disturbance permit, an avenue to express their grievances and potentially reverse decisions made by the Community Development Department. However, Chapter 16 does not specify a standard appeals process. So these next 6 amendments are, attempting to rectify this issue. And so it's going to span over multiple different sections. I'll first share with you our standard appeals process that is established in Chapter 27, and that's what we would like to make Chapter 16 consistent with. But essentially, the aggrieved party files an appeal with the Community Development Department, and it gets placed on a Board of Appeals agenda. Then when the cities have a Board of Appeals, any appeals typically go to them. And then staff stays all proceedings. So for example, if somebody appeals the approval of a land disturbance permit, any work on that site would cease unless it was a matter of public safety or need. Then staff provides all relevant information to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and then a hearing date is sent to the appellant. Lastly, the ZBA holds the hearing and has 60 days to make a decision. They make their decision according to specified criteria. It is the opinion of staff that this is the most logical process for appeals. And in the remaining chapters in 16, or excuse me, the remaining sections in chapter 16, they don't follow this logical process. They're all sort of different. So for example, in 16-33, it requires that decisions made according to Article 2, so such as the issuance of a land disturbance permit, it requires them to be published online in the newspaper and notice sent to adjacent property owners. This is impossible to do. We issue hundreds of permits a year, hundreds of land disturbance permits. So it's just not possible. So that's sort of a weird criteria to have in there. It also doesn't specify any effect of the appeal. So there's nothing that requires them to stay all the proceedings. There's no requirement. I mean, we would obviously do this, but there's no requirement for the staff to provide you guys with the records related to the appeal decision. It also only requires a 10-day advance to the appellant rather than 30, and that's insufficient timing for the appellants to prepare their case. And then lastly, it does specify the decision has to be made within 60 days and that it does specify approval criteria. However, we want to establish an appeals criteria that is more consistent with this standard appeals process that I just described. And so that's what this amendment would do. It would essentially make it consistent with that process. Then additionally, there's another section in our tree ordinance that references an appeals process that is inconsistent. So again, it's just referring back to a consistent appeals process. So chapter 16-272, this is where we would establish an appeals process for Articles 3 and 4 of chapter 16. And that appeals process, again, would look the same as 27, what I just described on that previous slide. So it's just going to add a new section, section 16-272. And then any appeals to to Articles 3 and 4 would get referred back to this section. So the appeals process for the rest of chapter 16 in section 16-190, 202, and 222, they specify a very weird appeals process where it refers these types of appeals to mayor and city council. So that means if somebody wanted to appeal the approval of a subdivision, that would go before you all, or if somebody wanted to appeal some sort of design criteria that's in section 222, that would go to you. And that's contrary to all other appeals process. Like I mentioned earlier, most cities, when they have a board of appeals, all of the appeals will go to them. It also doesn't specify the effect of an appeal. It doesn't specify any record of the decision. It doesn't specify hearing notice. And the hearing and decision, you all would hold a hearing, but there's no time limitation for making a decision. And there's also no decision criteria provided. So again, for these three sections, section 16-190, which has to do with major subdivisions, section 202, which has to do with final plats, and section 222, which specifies the design and improvement standards, all of these sections would refer back to section 16-272, which again, it specified this standard appeals process. So these are all the amendments for chapter 16. If you guys have any questions, I'm available.
This is a first read. Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead, Jim.
So I'm a little bit unclear on when the requirement to engage a professional engineer or architect to get a permit triggers. The reason I'm unclear is because section 8-27A permit application 1, the paragraph 1 says, you've got all these things you might be doing that are going to require a permit. Okay, and that includes replacing, repairing, any system, just about electrical, mechanical. If I'm going to replace my HVAC system, I've got to get a permit. Great. But when you go down, our new language kind of says, but if you're in a 2,500 square foot or better, or 3-story or better, or 2-story, or 3-story structure, you've got to get you've got to get somebody to stamp it. And I'm here to tell you that would be absurd. Now, if I'm misreading it, tell me, but I don't think I am. You know, I do not want to, you know, I have been a registered professional engineer, and, you know, I used to do buildings. This was on the small building you're sitting in, I did not do, but this was on the small side of the office buildings I did back in the, was, engaged in designing, was engineer of record on for the mechanical and plumbing. And I'm here to tell you, you don't want to have to get me to stamp a replacement for mundane stuff like a HVAC unit replacement.
I forgot to open the public hearing.
Oh,
I'm so sorry.
okay.
Will you hold your question?
Yes.
Sorry, because there's nobody here in the
Yeah.
public. All right, sorry. I need to open the public hearing. So unless I see an objection, I'm opening the public hearing. I will give 10 minutes per side if anybody wants to speak for or against any of these recommended changes. Anybody want to speak for? I don't see anybody. Anybody want to speak against? I don't see anybody. So with that, I will close the public hearing. And Jim, please resume. Sorry.
Okay. Do I need to repeat all that, or
Stacy.
I don't think we want that. Yeah, I think you see where I'm coming from on this. I need to know, I need to have better definition on when this triggers, because, yeah, there's some big houses in Dunwoody, by this standard, I live in one, there's a lot of 5-4 doors out there that exceed this size. And, if I've got a, if I'm ripping out the kitchen but not changing the structural system of the building, just, putting in new cabinets, new flooring, new appliances, why in the world would I have to engage an architect to do that?
You would not have to engage an architect. So the intent of this section of the code in section 8-27 B3 for design professional requirements, the intent and interpretation of this section of the code is related to new construction.
Okay.
So the new construction of a home or the addition of like a second story on a home. That's what this section of the code is intended for, not for mechanical permits or anything like that.
Additions, so it's, I don't know, it was unclear to me just from the verbiage that, that A paragraph or, A1 paragraph, it didn't apply to all A1 paragraph permits. I don't know.
Do you want to send some language to them later this week or?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just a little bit of clarifying language that it's intended for, that this is for new construction or additions. And maybe that's what I'm looking for, is maybe just add the words new construction residential structures that exceed.
If you look at section 824 above, that says existing buildings. Maybe we just have to have a delineation there.
Where's that at, Joe?
824 up above, it shows, that's a block. Section 824 is entitled existing buildings. So, and 827 just says permits, doesn't say, what is the permit?
Probably just need some wordsmithing.
Yeah, I don't think it's a big change, but I think you see what I'm after, and,
You're not changing the intent. You're okay with their intent.
I'm okay with the
Just have
intent
to
as we
clarify.
discussed here. It's just that by my looking at it, I think this could be taken
Right.
this could be interpreted that you need to do it for any of those items in A1, and I don't think that's what we want to do. And that's what that's what, community development is telling me, but I think the verbiage is a little unclear, and maybe we just need a little tweak to the verbiage to make sure that it's for new construction and additions, onto structures of this size.
Okay.
Thanks.
You. Anybody else? Tom?
I'm sorry. Yes, Madeline, thank you for the presentation. I have a question, and really, I'm just looking for better clarification because I didn't quite get a grasp of it with all the materials. As far as the removal of the public notice requirements, stated as a matter of impracticality. So could you give us just a little bit more information on that? Why, when, what specifically we're removing that requirement for, and why is it impractical, I guess? Well, why are we making this change?
So 16-33 specifies the appeals process for the land disturbance permits. So section 16-33 is split up into several different articles. And so 16-33 is in reference to appealing decisions made from Article 2, which includes the issuance of land disturbance permits. And so the interpretation of this section implies that whenever a land disturbance permit is approved, we would need to publish the decisions online in a newspaper. And like I said, we issue, hundreds of land disturbance permits every year. So that's a really sort of impractical task. Would have to have essentially a full-time staff member to fulfill that requirement. And it hasn't been applied in practice just because it's very weird.
Okay, so it's only on the issuance of a permit, a land disturbance permit. Is this part of the appeals process? If I was appealing a decision?
So you can appeal a decision even if it's not advertised. The way you appeal a decision is, you would prove that, hey, I became aware of this, issuance of a land disturbance permit at this time, at this day. And then from 30 days of you knowing, what's happened, you have 30 days to appeal. So there doesn't have to be any sort of public notification required. You can still appeal regardless. And you can still appeal any decision. It's just saying that the community development department doesn't have to issue, a newspaper ad and send out mailers every time a permit's approved. So.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? I have one. If you could go back to the language, it was maybe the first thing you talked about, which is the permits and the 2-year time limit. So I have some questions about that, which probably aren't exactly why you amended it, but so 2 years, does that mean, explain to me how it works. So my neighbor knocks down their house and they pull a permit to build a new house. And then they start and it sits half, quarter, 10% completed. How does this, 2 years is a long time for no action. So is my example, am I understanding that they have 2 years and then they can just restart? We've had this before, so that's why I'm kind of confused because I don't think they had 2 years. But maybe, I don't know, sorry. So wait till you get, sorry. Like I said, it might not be relevant to this.
If they begin the process of constructing the house, they have the permits.
Yes.
It expires after 6 months of no activity on the house.
Okay. So what is this for? What kind of permits are we talking about here?
So chapter 16 relates to land disturbance permits.
Okay.
And we actually have this amendment in both chapter 16 and chapter 8.
Okay.
Chapter 8 is for regular building permits. Neither of these code sections specify a path to reinstate a permit, but essentially this does happen sometimes where somebody pulls a permit for land disturbance, but they never actually break ground. Especially for larger projects, funding might fall through.
Right.
This gives them an avenue to come back, maximum of 2 years later and reinstate that same permit. And the benefit to them being able to reinstate this permit is the way we've written the code section is rather than going through and starting from scratch, they can take their existing plans, update them if necessary with any, current code changes to reflect what current regulations are. and then they don't have to repay the entire chunk of the review fee. They
Gotcha.
can pay a lesser amount. The way we're proposing to amend the fee schedule is 10% of the original permit amount. So they would just pay a small fee for re-reviewing, but they wouldn't be, say it's a big project. They've got a $10,000 permit fee. They don't have to come back and pay $10,000 again to start that project.
So just out of curiosity, a big project, what is their land disturbance permit fee usually averaging or on?
So like and I'll say kind of for both this and the construction permits,
Right.
because we'll have the same proposed. High Street is in the ballpark of $1.5 million.
For their
permit
land.
fee.
So, but we're saying that we would only charge them up to 10% because I can't imagine that a review would only cost $10,000. Or
So-
we're saying we haven't spent any of the original fee. Is that
Correct.
what
So
we're
typically-
assuming?
Typically, where this scenario would come in is the permit is reviewed, the permit fee is paid.
Uh-huh.
A large part of the permit fee pays for the inspections, because we'll have, if it's a 5-year ongoing project,
Right.
we'll have weekly inspections. We're out there all the time. That's the really expensive part.
Mhm.
The review fee is a relatively small increment comparatively, and that's what we're trying to reflect here.
Okay, thank
So-
you.
And like a house, for instance, is like $3,500 more or less new construction. And then residential addition modification typically is $500-$600 ballpark.
Thank you. Anybody have any other questions? All right, so this is a first read, so we'll see it again.
The next public hearing item is an ordinance to amend Chapter 27 zoning ordinance of the City of Dunwoody Code of Ordinances to amend language for expired and obsolete zoning districts, rear setback measurements, OI allowed uses, use determinations, residential infill, relatives residences, posted notices, perimeter center open space, and appeals, to add a new section for concurrent variances and special exceptions.
So chapter 27 has the most amendments out of the other chapters we're amending. The first is for section 27-30 expired and obsolete zoning districts. Dunwoody has 2 expired zoning districts that are technically still active. These are the zones R-CH and R-CD. I've pulled some examples here that you can see on the screen. So for example, Brook Farm and Brook Ridge are zoned R-CD. And then Claridge Square, and both of these are off of Dunwoody Club Drive, is zoned R-CH. These are cluster type developments. However, these districts are expired, which means developers cannot rezone properties to these zoning districts, but they're still active on our zoning map. And so multiple neighborhoods, like I said, still have these designations. The regulations for R-CD and R-CH at some point were removed from the code, but we feel as staff that they need to be reincorporated for ease of reference, especially if homeowners in these neighborhoods would like to seek variances. This is an actual issue that we've come up with is, what code section do you request a variance from if the code section's not there? And so we want to reincorporate them so they're available in the current version of the code. The next section is for section 27-58 regarding rear setbacks. This section details the lot and building regulations for single-family homes. Currently, there is a footnote in our dimensional table that contradicts the code and also contradicts standard practice by not assigning corner lots a rear setback. It essentially states that these lots are subject only to street setbacks and interior side setbacks. Most lots in Dunwoody require a 40-foot rear setback and a 10-foot interior side setback. So that's a significant difference of around 30 feet. So this amendment seeks to rectify that by requiring a rear setback be parallel to the front property line. And this is, again, standard practice, and we're seeking to rectify that. And I've got a little graphic here on the right just to illustrate the difference in the buildable area for your reference. The next section is related to the O-I zoning. So O-I is office institutional, and it doesn't allow any kind of retail. However, a few months ago during the business license review process, the Community Development Department received a license request for a jewelry store located in an office building zoned OI. So the city of Dunwoody technically doesn't require a business to obtain a license before they open. They have 30 days after they open to officially apply. This led to an issue because the jewelry store tenant had not confirmed beforehand if the zoning was appropriate prior to opening. However, we caught this during the business license review, and we conducted a site visit and determined that the use was unobtrusive and did not conflict with the character of the area. So based on these findings, we are proposing an amendment to allow these types of uses in OI, to allow this jewelry store to stay, and additionally allow future retail tenants in the OI district without negatively impacting, like I said, the character and the intent of the zoning district. So the standards that staff proposes would seek to accomplish that goal by limiting retail to office buildings only. So it would restrict it to accessory uses on the ground floor and limit the size to 2,000 square feet per tenant space. So this would allow small, low impact retail spaces to move into office buildings, but it prevents office buildings from being completely converted to full retail, and also prevents commercial uses from moving into many of the residential districts that also exist in O-I and are grandfathered in as such. So overall, we feel that this is going to allow greater flexibility for both business owners and property owners, while also supporting the comprehensive goal of supporting businesses and economic development. The next amendment is for section 27-111 for use determinations. This is a daily activity that we conduct in the zoning department. Basically, that last slide was all about use determinations. So it's something we have to do often when reviewing business licenses. We're typically reviewing at least 10 per week, and often people's proposed businesses aren't fitting into sort of neat little boxes, that are described in our code. And so we have a set of criteria that we use to make determinations to say, okay, is this allowed or is this not? And so we're not proposing to amend any of the criteria that we use to make our decisions. We're just proposing to remove a requirement that requires that these decisions be advertised. Like I said, this is a daily occurrence in our department almost, and a daily occurrence in all zoning departments. And this is not a code section that I've found in any other city's codes in the area. And so we're proposing to remove it just because it's a little bit impractical to enforce, again, for sort of daily activities that we do. Just the advertising costs would be extensive, and just the man hours it would take to alert people to that. And also it doesn't really have any standards for what types of determinations would get advertised. Overall, like I said, we just find it a little impractical. The next section is referencing section 27-150.1. So this details the permitting process for telecommunication structures on private property. This is a similar issue to what we were dealing with in chapter 16, where the appeals process is not consistent. And so we're just amending the code so that section 27-150.1 refers to the general appeals process in Article 5, Division 8. This next amendment for section 27-174 is related to relatives' residences. This amendment seeks to remove the requirement that a relative's residence be removed once the intended relative vacates the unit. Again, this is another one of those things that's really impractical to enforce. It would simply be too difficult and really intrusive to people's privacy. The rest of the chapter would remain the same. And I understand there's some sort of, I think I understand the intent of the code section where it requires it to be removed, but just to sort of quell any fear about it being rented out to another household, that's actually not allowed and would violate the nature of single family zoning. So that's not something that we necessarily have to worry about. We have ways to enforce, the single family zoning requirement. without them having to remove it. This next amendment is to the special administrative permits section. The first is to formalize a practice that we already do, which is to post our special administrative permit decisions online. And the second is to have section 442 reference, again, the proper appeal section for chapter 27. Like I said, it's similar to the issue in chapter 16, where it's referencing a non-standard appeals process. This next section, 27-104 and 574.5 is related to perimeter center open space. Within the PC-2 zoning district regulations, there is a requirement that buildings with a floor area ratio of 12 or above provide an additional type of open space. It isn't a very useful requirement, and it's also the only place in our code that utilizes floor area ratio. Floor area ratio, if you're not familiar, is the ratio between floor area and lot size. And because this is the only place that utilizes FAR, if you choose to remove this requirement, we should also just remove the definition from the code as well. But overall, it's not going to affect the amount of open space that people are required to provide. They'll still have to provide the same amount. There's just not an additional requirement in there to provide an extra type of open space. So this next section is related to concurrent variances and concurrent special exceptions. So this is attempting to introduce a new zoning procedure. This would allow applicants to seek a variance or special exception in conjunction with their rezoning or special land use permit. The code actually already has this type of process, though it isn't called this. But we allow this type of thing for planned unit districts, and we also allow it within the perimeter center districts. So it isn't brand new. This amendment would simply allow this to occur within any zoning district. We feel that the benefit of the concurrent variance and special exception process would be, rather than going through two separate processes, an applicant could go through one altogether. And so it makes reviewing new developments easier and cleaner. It also allows the city council, so you all and relevant stakeholders, to be more confident in the final product. So, for example, you guys aren't approving a development and then say they need a variance for a setback. They go to the Board of Appeals, but Board of Appeals has a different opinion about it. And so then the site plan doesn't work anymore, and then they have to come back to city council. It puts the process all together in one. And then just to clarify, I think I forgot to mention this, you guys would review variances and special exceptions all according to the same criteria as the Board of Appeals. But like I said, it would go before you all in one cohesive process. So these are all the amendments I have for chapter 27. I know it's a lot. I'm happy to go back to any other slides if you need to reference them, and I'm available for any questions.
All right, I'm going to open the public hearing. Unless there's an objection, seeing none, I open the public hearing. There'll be 10 minutes for anyone who wants to speak in favor of these text amendments. I don't see anybody that wants to speak in favor. There will be 10 minutes for anyone who might want to speak against these amendments. Seeing no one, I close the public hearing. John.
Thank you, Madeline, for the presentation. I have a couple of questions on two of the points. I'll start with the concurrent variances. A number of those issues would be going to the Zoning Board of Appeals, correct? Previously, right now? And I heard, what's the maximum amount of time that they have to make a decision? Did I hear 60 days based in your other presentation?
So the variance process is different from the appeals process,
Okay.
but I believe the Board of Appeals is technically only allowed to defer a decision once or twice. So I believe it's still the same 60 days, Paul, if you know off the top.
Artie, you'll know.
Yeah, and it could be consented as well. Sometimes it goes over.
My concern basically is that we are moving the process away from the ZBA and giving it to the Planning Commission and City Council. I want to make sure that the amount of time given to the planning commission and to the city council is equivalent to what's given to the ZBA. Right now, the planning commission is only allowed one deferral. And if the ZBA has 60 days, I would contend that we should be making the planning commission have the same 60 days as they are the recommending body before coming before us. Thoughts?
Paul, can I borrow your code? Sorry, I'm just going to look it up in the code directly.
Okay, please, yeah, I'm trying to think it through. I want to make sure that the processes are fair and equitable going from ZBA to the planning commission, city council. Because we've tied the hands of the ZBA to only for one deferral. Unless it's on a planned development, which we then just extended recently.
It was planning that we tied.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying,
ZBA,
planning,
right? You said
yes,
ZBA.
I'm sorry, yeah, we tied the hands of the planning commission, correct.
Okay, so I just reread the code this is in Division 5
Okay.
of Chapter 27, excuse me, Article 8, Division 5. We don't specify a time limit for the ZBA to make decisions. We only specify that on appeals.
And there's my concern, because right now we are tying the hands of the planning commission that they have to have only one deferral, where there's no number of deferrals on the ZBA. If staff could take a look at that and try to put some equity in there to allow the planning commission to have enough deferrals to where it gets to 60 days or thereabouts, whatever seems fair and equitable. I want to make sure that they have their time limits to do their job.
So just
Go
to
ahead.
clarify, you would like planning commission to have the ability to defer additional times to give them more time to review it. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And then it comes to city council, then we do it as a one big project. Is how it's planned to work, correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
And
So
there's no limits on how many times.
no, I know, I'm not, it's as our advising committee, I want to make sure they have enough time to do what they need to do before it comes to us. Because again, the zoning board of appeals doesn't have a time limit, but we've tied the planning commission's hands, and I want to untie them for these types of issues.
Same as that we did for the
Correct.
UDs. Okay,
Correct.
no problem.
And then the second issue I wanted to talk about was the corner lots. If you go back to your graphic, right now, houses are built to the buildable area on the top. And when they need to go back in for a construction, the redo of the deck, let's say the very back of their property is the deck, how is that going to affect them replacing their deck?
So to clarify, I don't actually think any houses in Dunwoody are actually built according to the top graphic. It is, like I said, a weird footnote in our table. And it actually a lot of the properties here were platted a while ago, and they were platted according to the standard on the bottom. So there's actually not that many houses. Like I said, I don't think there's any that were built with a 10-foot rear setback. There is a recourse for, people can repair and maintain existing decks. There is also special administrative permits that allow people to encroach like an additional 10 feet into their rear setback without having to get a variance. So I think there's recourse.
I guess I'm just looking at it from a perspective, if my house was built to this standard and I had a deck that met these existing requirements, am I taking away their property rights by making this change?
Yeah, we found this one really early on when we all came in, like the new team, because we had permits that we needed to review. We have these two things that are conflicting. So we actually went back into approvals from years ago. We looked at what have people actually done in practice with this conflict. And then we looked at plats that were subdivided that showed the setbacks. Everything is really built to this, what's shown here is proposed. So we really Dunwoody never permitted based on the existing. So this would merely correct something that should have never been in the books.
And typically for residential, it's 40 feet on the back. Is that what I remember? Okay. I'm trying to make sure that we're not, I mean, these are grandfathered in right now, but if we make this change, they're not grandfathered in. If they need to replace a deck, that's kind of where I'm worried. That's my concern.
That was very much my concern too, that we didn't want to create something where we create headaches for people. So that's why we did look at all those subdivisions that we had permitted to make sure that we don't create any new non-conformities, because that just creates work for the Board of Appeals and headache for the homeowners, and we really don't.
Okay, I'm just not sure how to protect those corner houses that come in. But okay, if you're saying you've done the research, that's my concern about taking away the property rights for those that already have that existing condition in. So there's no grandfathering once this goes into place. Moving forward, it's through special administrative variances and things of that nature at that point. Okay, thank you. No other questions. I appreciate the work.
Go ahead.
I got two questions. I'll follow on John's point on the concurrent. I'll ask a newbie question. Decisions that we make, or that's going to make, are they also appealable to the DeKalb Superior Court? I mean, if people are not happy, is that where it goes?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Because I was concerned that if you go in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals, you have the appealable body of the next court that you go to is that. I just want to make sure that stays as well. That's the same thing.
Yeah, appeals go to, appeals beyond the city's decision go up to Superior Court.
Okay, good. The next thing, my next concern was on number 7. So who determines if it is not offending the character?
So as staff, we went out and specifically conducted a site visit for this specific use that we came across, and it was very low key. It was in a small tenant space around 2,000 square feet, and it wasn't affecting traffic or the character of the area. But in general, this amendment very specifically allows retail in OI, and then there's a little footnote that specifically states that the retail has to meet these certain standards. So it limits them to, like I said, the maximum tenant space. We only allow them on the ground floor, and they're not permitted in residential districts. And we feel that this keeps them sort of small, more like boutique type retail that we feel won't affect the character of the OI district.
Yeah, I had the feeling, because I'm not suggesting something, but something to think about. I could imagine the person in the future that doesn't want any particular business to actually go in that space. And then next thing you know, they're attacking that part, or that might become an issue as to what's the guideline? How do you determine that? But thanks for answering that question. But that's one thing I think that might come back and maybe bite you guys in the future.
Go ahead, Stacey.
And this goes to the uses where you guys are determining the use and whether it fits in the zoning category. And I understand to not advertise it, but you also, I believe, took out, so the grievance process. So if the adjoining tenant property owner don't agree that you should allow that use, what is the process to address the grievance? That's what I didn't understand.
So even if it's not expressly stated, this can be appealed. Any administrative decision made based off the standards in Chapter 27 can be appealed. And like I said, people just need to establish that this is when I found out about the decision and that they have appealed within 30 days.
Okay. So there is still it'll be that same clearly defined.
There's still recourse.
Okay.
Even if it's not specifically stated, this is the appeals section.
Okay. My other question is, and this is kind of going along with Artie, with the retail and the O&I get it, I understand it, but what are the limits on the retail? Like, I mean, a vape shop is retail. And how do we vape shop? So how do we further define what retail uses we want going in O&I?
So, oh,
I just,
I can pull up chapter 27 and I can pull up our allowed use sections. And we do have definitions for the different uses. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up.
because I was thinking since it's not allowed in O&I, there probably wouldn't be definitions as to what could potentially be allowed. So we might.
So the use sections, we have the general table that, is like, okay, here's all of your zoning districts. These are the different
Yeah.
uses. And then all of the uses that are listed there, it's in a separate section where we define all those. They're not defined based specifically on the zoning district, if that makes any sense. Actually, I don't think it does. Let me just read the retail section.
Oh,
So for retail sales, that involves, the sale, lease, or rent of newer used products or merchandise to consumers. So that typically includes drugstores, department stores, florists, coffee shops, bike shops, camera shops, etc. So that type of retail. And that's how we've defined it, basically. And then let me pull up the. Yeah, and then we also allow other food and beverage retail sales. So people can open up, a place that sells little snacks and such. Do you have anything to add?
And let me quickly add to that. We mulled this over quite substantially because what we wanted to put in there was sort of, something that other cities call boutique retail or like sort of office related retail. So it's your typical florist, it's a convenience store, things that are fairly common in office buildings anyways. What our zoning code does is has everything that we don't quite want called out separately. And then everything else is simply grouped into a group that's called other retail services, other food and beverage. So we only allow these groups. So everything that is sort of relatively undesirable is generally not grouped in here. And then the second part is that for these users, they're in office buildings, so they're in a relatively high value location, and they're strictly managed by someone who wants to lease out their building to corporate tenants. So we really don't have the same pressure sort of for undesirable users that you have in a strip mall and a shopping center elsewhere. So we didn't feel it was necessary to be sort of more prescriptive and then sort of, we specify specific uses and then in a couple of years, someone does something that's slightly different, then we have to come back. So we felt this was relatively safe with the sizing cap and by taking out the residential buildings in there, so that we're relatively confident that we'll get sort of quality development in those spaces.
Yeah, one more thing.
That's fine.
Man, just when addressing the timeline that John brought in, and I might be wrong, but I think my memory seems to, I just remember that it says no timeline, right? But there's a wrinkle, no more than 60 days for our decision. And I specifically remember having to ask for consent if it's for more than 60 days. So the code might say, it does say no timeline, but there's somewhere in there that kind of restricts the 60 days. So you might want to check it out. I was trying to look and find it there, but there is, I think there is a 60-day timeline on the, I might be wrong, but just double check.
I didn't see it I read through Division 5,
Okay.
which dictates the rules for variances, and I didn't see anything like
Okay.
that in there. I'll do a closer read.
Okay.
I'll see maybe if there's another section. But for appeals, which go to you guys, those do have a 60-day timeline.
Okay.
But the concurrent variances would be separate. They would be variances. So.
Okay, maybe that's it. That's what I was thinking. Thanks.
Joe?
So just firsthand, over in the Ravinia, I've been in some of those buildings and they've got a snack off it, it's a lunch place. You go for lunch or breakfast. They're not hitting the square footage maximum. I've been in those places. I'm visually seeing them. It's cafeteria style. I don't know what their square footage is, right? I don't know if it's an issue or they're going to be grandfathered in or not.
Are they commercial? They're not, are they O&I?
Those type of, that's a separate, there's a separate code section that prohibits exactly that type of space, or that allows that type of spaces already in the code, that allows these type of cafeterias and these food oriented for the use of the tenants type of places. They're allowed. I think there's no square footage maximum on those. No square footage maximum, yeah.
John, go ahead.
Madeline, I have a question on 27-147, which is the lots. Can you explain that to me? The residential infill. Residential infill was an issue many years ago, and I want to be real sure that we understand what we're voting on.
What number was that? 14?
It's number 9. It's
Nine.
27-147. I've been looking at the red line issues, and I'm trying to understand what we.
My apologies. I think I forgot to include that slide in my presentation. So the residential infill regulations, essentially, we feel that the intent of section 27-147, this number 7 for determinations, we feel that, we're trying to clarify it. It seems like the intent of the code is to allow the director a little bit of flexibility in making certain decisions, to, waive the residential infill setback requirements based on these 4 different criteria. And so we're essentially attempting to clarify that code section, making it a little bit more concise and direct that, yes, this is a power that we want to grant to the director to do this.
Okay, so I mean, the power seemed to have been there before. I'm looking at the red line in the addition. I'm trying to understand what the differences are. I'm having a hard time differentiating, but as long as everybody else is reading it and trying to understand it as well.
And this one was kind of, this one really comes when we started. I told all the zoning staff that we would, to keep the eyes open on something that's poorly written, on something that's inconsistent. So we would fix it in periodic times. Here, there's not supposed to be any substantive change. I think the requirements work, they're good, but they're written in language that a normal person is not able to understand, and that we had issues making sense of for ourselves. What we tried to do was translate it into normal English
So you converted it to plain language versus techno garble.
Yeah, but there's not any substantive change to this.
That's kind of, I was trying to understand if there was any, and I was trying to read both sides. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Let's see.
Give everybody a minute because this was a lot.
Like I said, if you guys think of anything after the meeting, let me know, send me an email. It's a lot.
And again,
I like the concurrent part.
You do.
Let me just
Makes sense.
Let me just ask the question on the obstructed right-of-way. Who's going to be enforcing that?
So
When a
Shane,
bush goes into the sidewalk, and how does that work?
so our code enforcement department would be the main enforcer of that. So our code enforcement officers are Shane Peoples and Valerie Hicks.
Okay.
And, that would be something, if they notice something dangerous, they have recourse to do something about it. Or if a neighbor has a complaint, they have recourse to go out there and rectify the situation.
And then as far as the right-of-way, do we have language in there that talks about sight lines for vehicles?
So the code section is very broad. It's not specific to sightlines.
I'm just wondering if it should. I mean, if I'm at a stop sign and I turn to the right and I got bushes in the right-of-way blocking sight lines, is that a violation or is it not a violation?
So I think the enforcement of this code would be based more on, you know, you're out there on the site and you can see that this is obstructing the view. Maybe not necessarily that we have engineering standards like sight distance, but we can see sort of anecdotally or have, you know, physical evidence that this is blocking view, and then we have course to rectify it, have them trim bushes back or something like that.
All right, well,
You jumped
Let me
ahead.
add to this too. Like sightlines, if you know, kind of like driving around the city, there's all sorts of, I mean, we have signs kind of that are built in the right of way. We have vegetation, we have occasionally buildings. We're not trying to clean all of this up at this point. That's sort of much larger issue. Where this came up was where construction fencing got loose and sort of went into, just the wind waved it into the right of way. And our code enforcement officers were mulling over what they had to go at that. And so this really is supposed to be just a very narrow, I mean, it's written broad, but it's for a very narrow focus, which is for us to have something easy to point to, where if something obstructs the right of way, obstructs the sidewalk, so they can easily point to this one here, and you'll have to remove it. So it's not trying to get at these larger issues that are in place. That's not what we're trying to do here.
all right, thank you.
One second, I had a question. Did you want to point that out? Okay, we'll work on it. One of the questions I had was, hold on, I have to find it, sorry. On the residential, not the resident, on the retail space in O&I buildings. So given maybe some changes in the office market, I presume that if they want to add a lot of retail to an office building, they have to come for a rezoning to commercial. Is that accurate?
No, so the code allows them, this amendment would allow them to do retail without a rezoning because we're specifically allowing the retail use there. But any retail tenant they have is going to have to fit within those standards.
Right, so what happens if they want to do retail on the second or third floor of a building? Because isn't that not allowed? or
It's
maybe-
not allowed, so it's only allowed as accessory uses on the ground floor.
So, but they could come for a rezoning if they wanted to change the uses.
Yeah, if they wanted to convert their property
Right.
to commercial, that would
Right.
come before you guys.
Okay. All right. All right, well, this is our first read, so we'll see this again.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Now we have the consent agenda. Does anybody have any questions or comments on any of these items? I want to thank Brandon Atkins, who owns Farmhouse Realty, for donating the space and contributing to the art project that's going to go on that building. So that's very exciting. Go ahead.
I don't know if it's for Michael Starling or not, but the permit is for 1 year for the public art. Is that our normal? I don't know if there's anybody in the room that can answer that. Is that a normal, what we're doing? Is it 1 year?
Is it?
It's 1 year in the attached signed agreement
It's
for that.
permanent though. I don't know. Bill, can you answer that?
It's a year
Oh,
for the public art easement. The terms are a year. And I'm just curious, is that our normal? And then they come back to us for, if they want to keep it up there, it comes back to council again.
unless,
Is that?
all right, do you want to pull it or it's okay. I think they may be planning, because this is a partnership with Sproul. They may be planning to do new projects each year.
I just want to put as much flexibility in the community as possible.
Yes, yeah.
That's
So,
the intent, you know?
yeah.
Okay. So,
Anybody have anything else?
thanks.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved by John, second by Artie. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously.
Mayor, moving to new business.
Chapter 8.
This is a first read of an ordinance to amend Chapter 8, Building and Building Regulations of the City of Dunwoody Code of Ordinances to amend language for expired permits and design professional requirements.
So for chapter 8, we have 2 text amendments. The first is related to requiring licensed architects and engineers to stamp plans. This power was previously granted by the residential building code, but the state of Georgia recently deleted the section that required this for new residential construction. This was brought to our attention by the building official who thought it was necessary to maintain that right, especially given the above average size of homes in Dunwoody. And requiring stamped plans can help ensure a higher level of quality. So that's the intent of the code, this code amendment. The next is related to expired permits. And so as we discussed earlier, issued permits expire 180 days after issuance or 180 days after the most recent inspection. Section 8 is related to building permits rather than Chapter 16, which was related to land disturbance. And it does the same thing as Chapter 16. Essentially, we're allowing people to reinstate their permits up to 2 years after expiration. Again, we do this informally, but it formalizes the process and again is explicit in the need for a re-review according to our current regulations.
So I'm just going to go first. And the language doesn't match this. So it's unless I'm reading it wrong. So it says it's scratched out. The fee shall be, it's red line, but then it's scratched out. The fee shall be 10% of the original permit's total fees up to a maximum of $10,000 in our document. And it says reinstatement of permit is subject to demonstrating compliance with all applicable. Oh, that was there. It's to reinstate an abandoned permit, the permit shall be resubmitted to the city for review and the prescribed fee paid, but it's scratched out in our document. So if that's a Scribner's error about the 10%, then go ahead.
So we had originally, I had written in the prescribed fee, which we had decided would be 10% of the original permit's total fees. But then we felt that, if things changed in the future, we didn't want to have this codified in the code and have to do a text amendment. Our code doesn't actually normally specify what fees are in the actual code section. We have our separate fee schedule for that. And so we just decided to put the fee in the fee schedule rather than in the code because it makes it easier for any future changes.
Okay, this is just a tiny bit confusing because the way it reads is it reads like it's in the code on here and it's not. So just maybe that's just a clarifying question.
Yeah, so, sorry.
That's fine.
Yeah, because we had
That's
amended
fine.
our amendments and so.
Right, I understand. Oh, yeah. And then tell me, because we've had this happen multiple times, walk me through how much leeway we give, particularly in residential areas, but we've had it happen in commercial areas too, where someone gets past the land disturbance part and then they start and they take these huge breaks. So at 180 days of the permit issue date, which is later, whatever. And then could they just come back 7 years from now and reinstate the permit?
Did you say 7?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just asking.
Yeah, so not 7 years later,
Oh, it says up to
but
2,
we give them a
right?
maximum of 2 years.
But is that reasonable in a residential neighborhood? Don't we want people to finish their projects so that residents don't have to live through half completed projects?
Yes, we do.
Right.
But especially in light of the supply concerns, we have people waiting months and months to get their.
Right.
finished
So that's
building.
we hope a temporary problem, and this is a permanent change to the code. So are we, is there, forgetting the temporary situation that we hope will get better eventually, is there a way to, I know you're looking for consistency, right, from the other part, but is there like a limit we could put on? Like for this code, it has to be a year or something? And when does it cease to exist at all and they have to start all the way over? When I see it 2 years it exists, so it ceased. But the question is that too long, particularly in residential neighborhoods?
It's up to you all to decide that, so.
All right, that's my question. I think it's a long time to live next to an active construction site, but I don't know what everybody else thinks.
I would agree if it's an active construction site, but if somebody rips out their kitchen and they can't get that big wolf oven for 18 months, I don't care. So I guess, I don't know how you codify
Right,
that.
I don't know how you change. So the situation we had in other neighborhoods has been much more dramatic than kitchen. It's been, they take a house down to the studs and then all the critters start living in, and so that's the challenge. So
Is there a limit to the number of times they can reinstate the permit? Is it just a one-time reinstatement, or is it, because if it's in perpetuity, the number of years doesn't matter because they could just keep renewing it after 1 year or after 2 years or after, so is there a limit to the number of times it can be reinstated?
I'm just reconfirming. It doesn't limit the amount of times that they can reinstate it. It just says it has to be reinstated within 2 years, regardless of the length of time that it requires them to reinstate it. I think the issue of, abandoning construction is separate from what we're addressing here. That when somebody abandons construction and like the mayor pointed out, it leads to, critter problems. That becomes more of a property maintenance issue, and that's when our code enforcement department can get involved with enforcement action on properties that are dilapidated like that.
I guess to the mayor's point, though, if they can continue to reinstate the permit, if we shorten it to 1 year, at least it puts a little bit of urgency in the sense of the contractor or the homeowner, that's whoever's doing the work, to come back every year and say, hey, oh yeah, by the way, I got a project here. And if the project takes 5 years, I guess under, this, they can still just continue to reinstate it, but at least they're going to have to do a little work to keep reinstating it. They can't just forget about it.
I think that's what the code says under time limitations. One or more extensions of time of 180 days may be allowed by the building official for the application, provided the extension is requested in writing and justifiable causes determined. So to me, it sounds like it has to be active construction, or they can just say, no, we're not going to give it to you at that point.
That section actually refers to time limitations during plan review. So that's before work has even started and before a permit's issued.
Okay. And what exactly, what paragraph are we looking to change?
No, 6, no. 5 and 5 a little bit, but 6, that 6 review, because it doesn't read that way.
All right. I don't see any red lines on that. That's why I'm asking.
Oh, 6 is red.
Okay. All right, maybe I'm looking at a different one.
Right. So it says time limits after issuance on our number 6.
Okay. thank
Yes,
you.
that's correct.
So
there's-
that's
yeah.
not plan review.
No, so number
did
5
this
is
one.
time limitations.
Oh, during plan review. Got you.
Mhm.
I see now. Okay, thank you.
No, it is confusing, all the different
So
colors.
we don't, the question is how big a problem is this in how big a problem is this in residential neighborhoods that we ought to consider capping, like the number of times they can get the thing renewed before they have to start over?
Less than half a dozen times since I've been here.
Okay.
And it was usually some, for example, a house on Dunwoody on the left side, just north of the village, that sat there almost done forever and ever. We got on
Right.
there, and we kept pressuring him, but he would do just a little work to get the permits. So.
All right. Anybody else? Thank you.
The next item is an ordinance to amend Chapter 26, Streets, Sidewalks, and Other Public Places of the City of Dunwoody Code of Ordinances to amend language for obstruction in the right-of-way.
So we only have one amendment for chapter 26, which we discussed a little bit earlier, but essentially staff is proposing to add a section outlining obstruction of the right-of-way. So for example, overgrown hedges and plants obstructing sight distance for drivers, bikers, and pedestrians, or trash cans and dumpsters blocking the sidewalk. Those are just a couple of examples. This amendment allows code enforcement to rectify these potentially dangerous situations. Again, if you have any more questions about this section, I'd be happy to address them.
Go ahead, John.
I just, in reading it, it's, I think it could include all the sight lines and all the rest, basically from what I'm reading it. I'd love for you to take a look at it from that perspective to see if you either want that to be part of the problem or the solution or not.
Anybody else? Right. Yeah. Okay.
But
That's it.
We had, we had an issue in our neighborhood a few years ago where a property owner didn't want kids walking in her front yard as they walked home from school because there was no sidewalks and her cars parked on the street. So she took caution tape and, well, first she turned the sprinklers on the kids, and then she put caution tape all around her front yard so the kids had to walk in the street. So my question is, would this, and this would be something where the code enforcement or the police could point to this and say, you can't put caution tape all around your front yard. Is that, I mean, what are we gonna call that? Goods, merchandise, signs, displays? Is that,
Let me pull up the code section exactly.
it was all, yes, because it went up to the curb.
If it were,
Well, you did, but, so, okay.
You have to speak into the microphone, please.
This gives a basis for the code enforcement to cite them specifically under the code.
That's what I thought, okay.
I see plant materials right away.
Yes, but we also require plants in the right of way. So we'll
You're gonna fix that?
yeah, we'll look at it.
Right. Right, because we want people to, if we're gonna put the grassy thing out, some people want to not have grass, they want to put out monkey grass or flowers or whatever. Okay,
So
go ahead. Make
my
sure my-
only
oh, you're on.
concern with that is for the trash cans and dumpsters, and this is our own neighborhoods, it's that, I don't know if there's a way we could put, except for days when trash is collected and the garbage, the guys that, or the gals that collect the trash are the ones that put it on the sidewalk, and you don't have time because we work, so you don't have time to come back. So I don't know how you fix that problem, but that, I mean, we don't want the trash. And then there's the extremes. You could see like the people that leave their trash can for like 2-3 days.
I think we actually have, the cab sanitation has rules about that, so.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyone? All right, so we've given you some instructions, and this is just a first read, and if we need to work on it more after the next read, we can. Thank you. Next page.
Mayor, the next item is an ordinance amending Chapter 20 of the City of Dunwoody Code of Ordinance by adopting a new sign code to replace the current sign code. This is Paul.
All right. Tonight's meeting is very heavy on community development code issues. This one, at least, you've seen before, and you're intensely familiar with. I want to quickly go over the changes. Like this one was before you last 2 months ago, where you instructed us to seek out a legal review by an outside attorney. We gave this to Laurel Henderson, who's one of the leading sign attorneys, one of the leading experts in the state of Georgia. We gave this to her. We gave the draft as it was before you all in July. She gave it back to us with 6 pages of changes that she recommended. We incorporated those. We sent it back to her. She gave it back with 1 page of changes that she recommended us to do. We sent it back, and then she emailed us back that she thinks all issues were addressed, and it is now. She recommends, from a legal perspective, that it is ready to move forward. So we were happy to do that. The main items that she had flagged was that one, all the items as they pertain to the permitting of signs, as they pertain to appeals of signs, she said should be in the sign code itself. So we added those. We tried to keep them as consistent as possible with the other permitting processes, both because that's sort of how we have been doing it, and to sort of maintain what Madeline had referenced, kind of maintain similar processes for similar things. But all of those things are incorporated now in the sign code, and they weren't before. And then the second one is something that she had hammered home, where there shouldn't be any discretion on signs because it is a First Amendment issue. So we tried to take that out. We adjusted definitions, we clarified the language, and we added standards that described how we make decisions in addition to those that were there before. Those were sort of the main items of the legal review. In the memo to this, it's part of your package, I've put in a table where we have everything that was bigger than sort of a correction. We have included those here. I want to go over the biggest items in the presentation too. Number one, residential banners that was discussed in July, where you all had recommended to not just do it on subdivisions that have entrance walls. We incorporated language in here that allow these residential banners. So it's a typical kind of graduation type banner, also for subdivisions that do not have a wall. So those can be now put on fences. They can be freestanding also. The way we did this was we changed the limited duration sign language in the code, and then we also changed the definition section here. These are, again, they're intended to be subdivision signs, so they're not on individual homes. For these EMC signs, and that's sort of that's the display signs, that's your LED screen type of signage. We added some additional regulations here to limit the visual impact. One item here is a brightness kind of measure, and this is kind of 0.3 foot candles above ambient conditions at certain distances. So if it's very light outside, the sign can be very bright. If it's very dark outside, the sign has to be dimmed. The second is we put language in here that the message must remain static for at least 10 seconds. Already, so we don't allow sort of moving displays, we don't allow twirling, we don't allow those type of things. But so now there's a minimum measure for how long a message must remain, which is these 10 seconds. Then there's a minimum amount how long a transition needs to be, which is 8 seconds, to ensure that there's no sort of movement on these type of signs. So they're supposed to display a message. They're not supposed to play a video clip or anything of that nature. Yard signs, we cleaned up the residential yard signs. Before this showed small and large yard signs that were virtually the same dimensions. So they were both the same area. So we took out the large yard signs for residential, so that yard signs for residential just do not need a sign permit, period. And then we added additional limits here for commercial districts, where we clarified that there's one maximum yard sign per tenant suite. Well, before it was worded somewhat ambiguously, and it would have hypothetically allowed for like a large amount of signs, so more visual clutter. So we're providing a stricter requirement here, but how many yard signs business can do. We added a permitting process that is similar to our permitting processes for construction permits, because they in practice follow the exactly same process. These people submit it the same way, we review them the same way, we issue them the same way. So we pretty much incorporated the language here as part of the sign code. Same thing, appeals process. We included that here too to match the other appeals processes. The variance process I want to elaborate a little bit upon. City of Dunwoody does not give sign variances and has never given sign variances for something that's a larger sign. I want a larger sign. I want more lighting. I want bigger. That's never been the case. Before, we had two very niche type conditions under which we could have given sign variances. One was whether there were spacing requirements that prevented a sign. We do not have that in this type of sign code. So this was something that where variances couldn't be granted under this sign code. The second is where the visibility of a sign would be impaired by trees, by structures from surrounding properties. So it's not something where you can create your own obstruction and then ask for a different sign. We have a different approach to signs now. Before, you could do all the signs that are granted by the code. Now you have to pick and choose between different sign types. We feel that makes it not necessary to have this type of sign variance anymore, because of a certain, let's say a building sign can't be seen, you can do a hanging sign. If a horizontal building sign can't be seen, you can do sort of a perpendicular, one of those blade signs. So you can do different sign types under this code, where this type of variance also isn't really necessary to the same extent anymore. So we're simply proposing not to have a variance process as part of the sign code. And we would keep an eye on it, sort of see how it goes. And then if it ends up being necessary, if there's something that we overlooked, we would make that change at that time and potentially bring it back. But we really don't think it's necessary. And those are the main changes. We feel pretty good about the sign code as it is now. It'll make it easier to administrate. It's clearer, it's graphic. Conclude my presentation now, and I'm ready for any questions.
John?
Thank you, Paul. My main concern, I guess, is twofold. Number one, this has been a long-standing document and process. It actually started with a committee of citizens and businesses that took the first swipe at this code section. There's been a lot of work that has been done. I think I would like to give it back to that committee to have one more review to make sure that they look at it from their perspective. They started the process. I would, if at all possible, I'd like to have a deferral for 1 month, let them look at it and bring it back to us. I do have questions. I'm always worried about unintended consequences. And I'm looking at section 2021 on the electric message centers, basically LED signs. What's the maximum that an LED sign can be? And as far as the large signs along the highways that we have worked and basically been almost subject to lawsuits and all the rest with, I want to make sure that we don't change anything in the sense of allowing those types of signs.
So we had this discussed specifically with the sign attorney also, because there was a big concern with this, and it was a big concern also with the non-conforming section, that we didn't want to have those billboards to be changed into electronic message center sort of type of display signs. And so she had reviewed this fairly intensely, specific to the billboard issue, and we are confident that nothing here and nothing in the non-conforming section can be construed that billboards can be retrofitted with this type of signage.
I'm just trying to understand the difference between a billboard then and an electronic message center that's changeable. I mean,
so that the electronic message centers are only specifically called out under specific sign types in sort of the meat section of the ordinance. So
okay.
It's only specifically.
So there's a definition of billboard and it's not in the definition of billboard is basically sort of what you're saying.
Yeah. So they're specifically called out only for specific sign types, for monument signs and for wayfinding signs. And those are not billboards.
All right. Well, again, that's my biggest concern, and I'm happy to. I want to hear all the discussion, but at some point, I personally would like to have it deferred for 1 month to go back to the committee who started the process, make sure that their changes were in there, look at what we've done, give it back to us just for one more final citizen review. This topic's too big to screw up. Thanks.
Artie, sorry.
So two questions. The first one, I think I know the answer. I hope it's right. But the legal mind in me keeps forcing me to ask this question. I guess the eliminating the variance process, is that something that we check with the attorneys that we can do? Because I mean, they've come before us in the zoning, but okay, all right.
Yeah, it's one of the Laurel is a code writer too that just writes a lot of these type of sign codes. And one of them that she recommended to us specifically does not have a variance process too.
Okay. The second question is respecting to the banner as a temporary, is there a definition in the code as to what's temporary? Is it like 30 days, 20 days, 10 days, 5 days?
Yeah, for residential, it's up to 2 months in a given year.
Okay.
So you can have it up in increments, or you can have it up for 2 months total.
Yeah, thank you.
Jim?
Are there any restrictions on locations of signs in residential lots? And you know, my question is, you know, like distance from the adjacent lot. Can we require, say, a minimum 10-foot distance from the side lot line or something of that nature? You know, do we and can we, I guess is the two questions. I don't think we do.
Yeah,
And
we don't.
can we, should we?
We don't. For all of those, you know, we're dealing with we're dealing with just residents. They will, for the vast majority, no one will read the code of those. So this is just the reality of it. The people will just put it out. In practice, a lot of those will be in the right of way too, because the right of way extends for like
10
10
feet,
feet behind
typically,
the
yeah.
sidewalk. We could like it creates sort of this code enforcement thing in practice where people are going to call us if they have a grievance with their neighbor and have them move it. We could hypothetically, but no one proactively will do it in practice. And then we have an enforcement process, but how much do we want to? That's the question. How much do we want to engage in that?
What, say again, John?
The sign. The sign, right.
Yeah, well, you're right,
That-
right.
Go ahead.
It's just a clarifying on section 20-12, it redlined out, we removed that political signage verbiage. And that said, beginning of qualifying until the final determination is. Can you refresh my memory? You alluded to, I heard temporary signs in residential up to 2 months. We know that that time frame is longer than a 2-month period. Can you refresh my memory, point me where that would apply in our code?
Yeah, so we initially had this in there on the non-commercial messages. We allowed for these signs, or we allowed for more signs to be out during qualifying season. The attorney said we have to take it out. We can't do it. So right now we allow year-round 5 yard signs in residential districts. We could do less, but we can't restrict. We can't do more during qualifying season. We have to find a number that.
It's not the number, it's the time period I'm asking for about.
Oh, this was the 2 months is specifically for the banner signs.
So where's the time period for what used to be in 2012?
So that struck out entirely, kind of. So the residential yard signs are technically temporary signs, but they can be out year-round. What was in 20-12 was that additional sign allowances were made during qualifying season, and that had to go out.
So there have been court cases that say you can't regulate political speech differently than, somebody better be listening in case, than other signs. So if you say you can have "my child was a star student" signs up all year, you have to allow the same for political and vice versa, correct? Okay, I pay attention. So that's as I understand, so what I'm understanding is that what we learned is that the sort of the loosey-goosey language we allowed from qualifying to elections was not constitutional or was questionably constitutional. So now we just allow 5 signs in people's yards all year. So if they have 5 children who are star students, they can put up their 5 star student signs, or if they have quintuplets, they can put up their graduation signs. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, that's right, Mayor.
So I have an unintended consequent question, which there's probably nothing we can do about. On this permitting variance question, so say you have a building and you're allowed this sign, and you really want this sign, but no, say you want it this side, you want it horizontal and you're allowed vertical or whatever, and I know we have a menu of options. Are we going to be encouraging people to cut down trees because that's the only way to do it, because they can't come in and get a variance for a different type of sign?
So the variance was only
Maybe I don't know.
allowed for if your trees blocked it, you weren't eligible for a variance under the previous rules.
Okay, so if you own the trees,
Yeah.
okay, gotcha. Thank you. Anybody else? John?
Move to defer for 1 month to move this for review by the steering committee, the signs steering committee, reconvene them and have them review it and get it back to us within 1 month.
Second.
Moved by John, second by Jim. Any further discussion? And just to be clear, if they make changes, staff can just highlight them and council can make the ultimate decision.
Correct.
Correct.
Legal perspective again, so.
That's fine.
Yeah, that's,
They may just rubber stamp it. They may just look at it.
Right.
I just want to give them the opportunity to have.
and actually, maybe Laurel could sit in on the discussion. Or you don't want that?
I don't think she needs to.
Okay, we'll just figure it out as we go. All right. All right, any further discussion? None. All in favor signify, this is a motion to defer. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that's 6-1. Stacy was no.
Item number 14 is a resolution amending the budget for the fiscal year 2021 for the state confiscated American Rescue grants, motor vehicle, capital projects, debt service, and court funds of the city of Dunwoody, Georgia, pursuant to Article 5, Section 5 of the Charter of the city, beginning January 1, 2021, and ending December 31st, 2021, appropriating the amount shown in each budget as expenditures, adopting the item of anticipated funding sources, prohibiting expenditures to exceed appropriations, and prohibiting expenditures from exceeding actual funding sources. Linda Neighbors.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So the first is a confiscated funds, and we're just acknowledging the expenditures for the major one is education and training in the police. Also recognizing the receipt as a federal grant for the ARPA funds, American Rescue Plan. Then in the grant funds, the biggest of that is supplemental LMIG that we applied for and received. That's recognizing the revenues and the expenses. In the motor vehicle, several weeks ago, we approved the increasing the revenues and expenditures in the motor vehicle as it came into the general fund. This is the motor vehicle side of it. The capital projects, this is acknowledging the rental expense in the capital project fund of the flocks. And then also similar, a couple of weeks ago, we did the general fund expenditure for transferring where we had cut the debt service, and we're trying to accumulate for a balloon payment at the end of our lease term on this building. And the last one is the court, where we're just acknowledging on the 745, which is the custodial fund.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? This is an action item, correct? John, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just trying to look at the sinking fund for the building. What did we take out of there? I mean, I'm seeing a zero account.
So several weeks ago, well, I guess back in the earlier part in 2020, we actually reduced that. And then this is just restoring it so we could put it back in, and we did the general side of it. This is just acknowledging into the debt service fund.
All right.
So in other words, we're putting money into the sinking fund for the building.
That's right.
Okay, I'm seeing the zero. I'm trying to understand what we did, but it's somewhere else. Okay.
Well,
thank
so it'll come in as a revenue over into debt service, and we won't be paying it out this year.
Got it.
We're accumulating the balance for that.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay.
Move to approve.
Moved by Stacy.
Second.
Second by Joe. Any further discussion or questions? Seeing none, I call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, moving to discussion items. Item number 15 is discussion for on-base mitigation to the cloud. Ginger LePage.
And Ginger, you can just do both of them at the same time.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So tonight I'm presenting items 15 and 16, discussion on migrating Cityworks and onbase to the cloud. Currently, both of these applications are hosted locally on-premise servers. And given the drastic increase of cyber attacks, the current need to quickly accommodate an employee's ability to work remotely, we're recommending that we migrate these applications to the cloud. Some of the benefits will be limiting capital budget, minimizing needs of IT staff and efforts, scalability, and backups, connectivity, and security will be the responsibility of the vendor instead of the IT staff on site. onbase is the city's agenda software, and the cost of that to migrate is $34,000. That includes migration, configuration, and training. And it also has the first year annual increase of $15,000. And we're requesting to do that out of CARES 2 funding for a total of $49,000. Then after that, it would come out of the general fund, and that would be $38,000 a year, which is a $15,000 increase over our current rate. For Cityworks, that is the public works management software, and that is currently, it's going to cost $16,675 to migrate, configure, and train. The difference for the first year cost is $3,000. We're requesting CARES 2 funding for the migration and difference between the on-premise and cloud, and that's a total of $19,675. And the city general fund would pick up the cost in subsequent years for $35,500 a year, which is a $3,000 increase over our current annual rate. So.
Okay, this is the discussion item. Do people have questions? Joe?
So usually we'll show a cost reduction. I do an ROI calculation after like 3-5 years. It'll show, I know this subscription fee shows it's higher, right? So yeah, I see that up front, but we have to take into consideration the cost of hardware, maintenance, personnel, all that stuff. So I know I'm from a trust me, and I'm sure you all would assume this. I don't need to show the numbers, but obviously it goes without saying that the SaaS model in the cloud has an ROI and it reduces long-term costs.
That's correct, because we won't.
Yeah, because we're just, if you just look at that one annual, but
yes,
yeah, just one.
that is correct.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
So I have a question, and it's really basic. So when we've had these incidents, for lack of a better word, it takes a long time to rebuild our email databases because we get a lot of emails, and because of open records, they just live in perpetuity. Does this help with that in terms of rebuilding our databases?
So this, for Cityworks and onbase, yes, this would definitely improve because they're now the vendor is responsible. And because of the way that their systems would be set up, they have a much better ability to handle disaster recovery and backups and things of that nature than what we can do locally.
Okay, thank you. Joe.
Is there going to be is it going to be easier for searching items on agenda items and so on then? Do you know from feature functionality, because right now you want to go do a search
to
find an item from,
Yes. So one of the really great things about this that I'm actually glad you brought that up because I failed to mention, it means that we're going to get the updated version of all of these softwares. So this is really great because they're actually going to keep us updated and we're not going to have to worry about that. So one of the wonderful things for onbase that comes with this is now we get the upgraded version of the searching feature. So what we have right now is very antiquated and it doesn't work, as you guys know very well. And unfortunately, there's not much we can do about the old version, but the new version, they're going to keep us updated. And that means we'll get the working and the best version every time.
With updated versions, are we going, is that all done in the cloud, or are we going to have to update our tablets periodically? And I guess we'll get notified from you from when that's.
Honestly, I don't know if the software I honestly don't know for onbase in particular. I know for Cityworks, it's not going to be because it is updated in the cloud, but I don't actually know for onbase, so I will check into that and get back to you.
One last thing. Are they going to convert history data and put it up in the cloud then too?
Yes, they're going to take
Oh,
everything
man.
that we have right now and they're going to migrate it
Oh, my
to the
goodness.
newest version and put it on the cloud for us.
Wow.
And then right now we're not using, didn't we used to use OneBase's broadcasting system?
Yes.
And we've hybrided it or whatever and it's working, but if we ever want it to go, it didn't always work very well. Did you look at that feature at all?
So the new version, if we're still using Zoom, the new version's probably not going to work quite as
Okay.
well. But they were advising that there are some options for the indexing part.
Okay,
So once we get the training, we'll be able to actually figure out how to make that work a little bit better.
okay. Jim?
Just one question. Of course, the cloud just means somebody else owns the computer and hosts the computer. And I just, want to make sure we've done our due diligence and made sure their hosting facilities at least equal to what we have here and that they have, some kind of redundant backup hosting.
Yes, so our security team actually has a questionnaire that they send to each vendor before we move forward with a cloud migration. And so they have gotten the questionnaire back from both of these vendors. There were some questions about a third vendor that we were talking about, so we haven't gone that far yet. But that's why these two are up here, is because we did take them to our security team and ask the questions that needed to be asked. Mhm.
Anybody else?
Consent agenda?
Yeah, this can be on consent, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, consent. Everybody okay with that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Public comments. Anybody would like to make a public comment? You can stand up, fill out the card. Seeing none, city manager comments.
Yes, Mayor, we will need an executive session for personnel and litigation,
Mhm.
and we will meet in the Georgetown room.
Okay. Council comments? Anybody? Jim?
Good job to the PD and code enforcement on our recent terrible situation with our apartments here in Perimeter Center. And, God, good luck and praying for everybody who's been adversely affected by that event.
Absolutely. Anybody else? The concert was great. Saturday night. It was just a great event. So thank you to all parks and everybody who had something to do with it. All right. And with that, I need a motion for executive session for.
Move to
legal.
exit to executive session for purposes of legal and personnel.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We will be back.